What are your general thoughts about how to rate the accomplishment for the United States and the world of this peace deal? Is it too tentative to know? What are your just sort of general thoughts about how significant it is?
Yeah, I think it is too tentative to know. Um, there are two possible ways it could go. One is, as many of these previous efforts have made by other U.S. leaders, that is, it ends the immediate crisis, but doesn't then do anything to solve the long run problem. And after a while, you drift back into this situation being pretty much the way it was before the war started. And if I had to guess, I would guess that's where this will go. Although there obviously is some chance that it will lead to some broader agreement.
So if President Trump were watching this and he said, Dr. Halperin, you seem like a smart guy, how can we head that off? One thing which may be different, it's in the 20-point plan, is a peacekeeping force made up of Arab and I think European or Asian forces that will be on the ground. We haven't seen that before, right? So if that happens,
we haven't
that
seen
could
it
be different.
if it happens. I'm
Yeah.
very skeptical. It's very hard to put together a peacekeeping force, especially doing it outside the UN, which is this seems to be, because you have to deal with all the issues of who's in charge, who gives orders, whether people can turn down orders. I ran peacekeeping in the Pentagon at the beginning of the Clinton administration, so I've dealt with many of these issues, and a lot of them have to do with whether troops can opt out of an order that they get from a general or a senior officer of another country. Those are very hard, they're very complicated issues, and they mean that countries are going to be very reluctant to put in forces until all of those and many other issues are settled. It's, I think, a good step forward that the agreement has this in it. It isn't clear to me who's agreed to what's in this agreement,
Right.
whether it's
And
just an American initiative.
right. And they've been kind of opaque about it. But as you suggest, if you're an Indonesian soldier and you're patrolling the streets of Gaza City and some 13-year-old, shoots a slingshot at you and you shoot him, it raises all sorts of issues because, as you said, it's not NATO, it's not the UN, it's some new entity that's putting this, ostensibly standing this force up. And your experience in peacekeeping suggests that it's going to be difficult for any country to agree to that until their troops are their soldiers or whatever branch they're from have some understanding about the rules of engagement, their legal authority, right?
And even then, we've discovered, even in the UN situations, that troops often have secret instructions not to fire unless they're ordered to do it by their own government. And you don't really find that out until there's a crisis. So there are many, many steps in the way of actually having a peacekeeping force. It's obviously a desirable solution, but it doesn't solve the problem of who's running Gaza. I mean, the peacekeeping force would interfere, presumably, if there was some kind of a crisis or a riot or a breakdown of law and order. But day to day, who's running the country, the territory, is a different question, and they don't seem to me to have made any real progress on that.
Well, they might have made secret progress, right? Because there's all sorts of allusions to things in the deal that haven't been made public. We know Tony Blair, who's a relatively able guy with a lot of experience in the region, seems to be potentially at least in line to run it. But now we're talking about nation building. And if there's anything that's maybe as complicated as peacekeeping, it's nation building. And I think one of the insights the president's had that I think the previous administration was not as thoughtful about was Gaza's destroyed, right? There's no infrastructure. There's no way for people to live there, and it needs to be rebuilt. And so, yeah. So, but the president says he's a builder. Blair, understands these issues. So what would be your advice to them if they plan to have an international force? The president makes reference to this all the time. Rich Arab countries paying to knock down the stuff that needs to be knocked down and start to build sensibly.
But
how do you do it?
Well, I don't think anybody's going to do that until we know who owns Gaza. I mean, is it part of Israel? Is it part of a Palestinian state which doesn't exist, which means it's under the Palestinian Authority or under some new Palestinian entity, or under none of those things? And if it's under none of those things, it isn't clear who has the legal right to do it. I mean, is Israel, because it conquered it, have the legal right to turn it over? Does this group of nations really want to work under a designation from Israel? And if not, it's not clear who gives them that. Normally, it would be the UN, and the Security Council could, if there was no veto, create an institution under the Security Council. That's the only way I know that people would think it was not illegal to create this new thing.
But if President Trump says the Board of Peace owns Gaza and we're going to return it to the people of Gaza, the Palestinians under some authority, with a small a, when it's rebuilt, who's going to stop them? Is the UN going to sue him in the international court to say the Board of Peace doesn't run Gaza? No, the UN isn't going to stop
them, but countries are going to be reluctant to put troops in, not knowing whose orders do they ultimately obey.
The board, they obey the Board of Peace.
Yeah, but that's not a legal entity, and it doesn't. I would be very doubtful that countries would put in troops under this thing that was created out of whole cloth.
Right, and it sounds like what you're saying, which I agree with, although I'm less skeptical about it than you are, that unless there's an international force on the ground, that it's accompanied by a parallel governing authority that's got credibility and not being challenged, it's going to be very difficult to even deal with Gaza, let alone the wider issues about peace and stability, right?
Right. And with the question of who has sovereignty in Gaza, I just don't think you can ignore that.
So if President Trump hired you and said, I'm making you special envoy for peacekeeping, which, as you said, you dealt with in the government, and special envoy for government legitimacy, which is an issue you know a lot about, what would you do? What steps would you take to try to enact the exact things we're talking about? International peacekeeping force, and you go to the UN?
I go to the Security Council. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be blocked by somebody there?
Well, the only people who have a veto, I mean, certainly Britain and France will not block it. The United States will not block it. I think the president has a relationship with Russia that they would not block it. It's not clear to me that the Chinese would. There's only those 5 countries have a veto. But I would certainly say that's the path of least resistance and the one that gets you a clearly legal institution.
What would you ask the UN for, like a 2-year lease?
No, the UN would create a trusteeship, in effect, as it did for Kosovo, for example, after the United States bombed Kosovo and the Serbs got out, which is not, it's the closest analogy I think there is. Right. The Security Council passed a resolution, which the Russians did not veto, and the Chinese did not veto, and was adopted by the sufficient vote of the Security Council, which put Kosovo under the control of the Security Council, and then the Security Council, in effect, designated the United States to create a military force, which reported to the Security Council through the Secretary General.
Well, okay,
and which was stubborn.
Yeah. Okay, but if the president said to you, "I don't want to go to the UN; it's a commie organization," and or there's word that it would be vetoed, how would you try to do it if you couldn't go to the UN?
Not clear. It's not clear to me that you have anything that gets some legal authority.
Well, but it's extra legal authority, and he just goes to countries. He just goes to the countries who are in the room in Egypt this week and say, I need 5,000 forces, put them on the ground, and they do it.
I just don't think they will.
Everybody, let me tell you about an organization. It's called the Vapor Technology Association. It's a group started nearly a decade ago to protect the rights of Americans who choose alternatives to smoking. And it's about the small businesses who have made a living with this technology. They support science-based policies and the rights of adults to make healthier choices. Did you know that many family-owned vape shops and manufacturers across the country are now under attack thanks to what are outdated Biden-era regulations that threaten to wipe out an entire industry? The Vapor Technology Association, also known as VTA, says businesses are being destroyed and people are losing their jobs. But the VTA says President Trump has a clear opportunity now to change all this and to protect Americans' right to make their own choices, also to defend small businesses and restore a free and fair marketplace. Head over now to vaportechnology.org to learn more about the group and why they are leading the charge to support American innovation. And if their mission appeals to you, consider becoming a member when you get to the website. Again, that's vaportechnology.org, and tell them you heard about it here on Next Up.